Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation.
Hello listeners, welcome to the latest episode of the Free Marketeers podcast. You're listening to Christo Hattingh. I'm joined by Mpiyakhe Dhlamini and Martin van Staden. This week we're going to start talking about Venezuela and Zimbabwe, the recent protests in those countries, two beacons of socialist utopias. Zimbabwe is obviously close to home for us, but the Venezuelan situation is more in the news for the international media. Guys, I think just generally I want to talk about the effects of socialist policies on people in these countries. We can clearly see the effects thereof, the violence by the government in Venezuela led by Maduro. They've led crackdowns on the people there, and they've called it a coup now. What's your take on that, Martin? Do you think this is this just backed by Western imperialist forces trying to overthrow those governments, or do you think there's, a more serious problem going on in Venezuela?
Well, the thing that stands out for me, basically anytime I look at Venezuela and Zimbabwe, is the fact that, and I mean, I'm speaking under correction here, but this is something I think I heard from Maria Machado and Sari Levy at the FMF's EWC conference last year. But basically that before Hugo Chavez came into power, Venezuela was a middle-class country where people were pretty, I wouldn't say rich, but they were doing okay. They had institutions, relatively strong institutions. It doesn't mean they didn't have some, I think they had a military junta or something before that, but it was a relatively middle-class country. And what they told themselves was basically what every country tells itself before socialism writ large becomes the order of the day is, this can't happen to us. And I read recently that basically to a lesser extent the same was said in Zimbabwe, but I guess there it was quite clear from the start that Robert Mugabe was going to be a dictator. But in Venezuela this wasn't the case. This was Hugo Chavez. He was elected democratically. Everything was above board, I believe, and then he brought this socialist ideology, and the moment he said we're going the route of socialism, those institutions were being dismantled from the get-go until nothing was left except the strong man at the center and his party. And today we have Venezuela, which I think doesn't have a legislature. I think they call it the Constituent Assembly, which is basically just a puppet of the executive government. And
I would assume they call it the People's Assembly or something. Just put the word people in front of something and it works,
Well, so the National Assembly, which was the legislature that was last democratically elected, still is around, and that is the institution that America and the rest of South America, except Bolivia, recognizes as the only real government. So that's still around. I'm not sure how the mechanics of that is, but it's still there. But this was a country of institutions. They decided on socialism. Now it's a country of no institutions. And I mean, I think it's the same story every single time. You have some level of prosperity, or at least your trend is towards prosperity, even though it's slow. And then the moment that national decision is made that we're just gonna try it, let's just see what happens, then it's a complete disaster. And South Africa has been on that path for a while now. And geez, I mean, come on, people, can we just look around and learn, please?
Mpiyakhe, to you, because you're the Zulu man here, so I have to ask you for the African perspective on the Zimbabwe situation. We need to tick these boxes. Do you think the protests in Zim are going to result in any serious change, or do you think it's just going through the motions again? Or is there anything that you're looking for, any particular, anything about these protests specifically that gives you hope for the people of Zim?
Okay, let me just start by first disappointing you, Chris. I just wanted to add something in that as a Venezuela story. Yeah. So basically, everything that Martin said there was correct, but if you go back to the 70s, that's when Venezuela's problems actually started, when they nationalized the oil industry, and then that was basically what opened the route for Hugo Chavez to eventually take over in the 90s. So it's if you look at that story, you can see the parallels with South Africa, because we've already nationalized minerals effectively in this country. So we are on a similar path as we speak. Now moving on to, and before they did all of this nationalization and all of this stuff, Venezuela had one of the highest growth rates in Latin America. They were basically I would say after Argentina and Chile, they were probably third most prosperous country, but I would need to check my stats on that. Sure. So they just messed everything up. But anyway, moving to Zimbabwe, it's interesting for me comparing the two situations, the two different responses from the international community. And for me, from what I can see, the way the international community is basically said, okay, we could recognize the opposition leader, the one who is the head of the National Assembly there, as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Whereas in Zimbabwe, Morgan Tsvangirai tried many times over until he passed away, and he was never recognized, even though he was legitimately elected as the leader of Zimbabwe. And then for me, it just shows that's how important regional support is. Right. Because in Venezuela, the opposition has regional support. So Brazil, Argentina, all the powerful countries in South America have basically said, no, this is not right. We will not stand by and watch this happen. So the opposition leader is the legitimate president. Here in Africa, in Southern Africa, we have South Africa, which is probably the second or third most powerful African country, say refusing to back the legitimate opposition in Zimbabwe and sticking against all reasons, sticking with a brutal authoritarian regime which is brutalizing its own citizens, which is not only doing this now, which has been doing it since the 80s. And South Africa sticks with this regime, and now South Africa is supposed to be a democratic country, and it seems to me that we are not living the values embodied in the constitution in how we conduct our foreign policy. I mean, it's not just this issue, in many other issues as well. And there's probably going to be a Security Council vote soon in the United Nations. It will be interesting to see how South Africa votes in the Venezuela issue. But in almost every issue that we get a chance to put forward on, we always stick with these rogue regimes. And it's for me, it just shows the values that the government holds, even though it presides over a democratic constitutional state.
Yeah, I think you make an important point there, Mpiyakhe. So in both Venezuela and in Zimbabwe, the South African government finds itself on what we would say is the completely wrong side of history. Yeah. I mean, there are other countries, not just in South America, that do recognize the legitimate government of the National Assembly. Guess which government South Africa recognizes? The government of Maduro. Surprise, surprise. And I mean, I think I mentioned this on this podcast before, something extremely hilarious. But sometime last year, I think Venezuela was saying something about, no, America wants to invade us or something, and so on. And the South African ambassador in that country, and I'm not joking, this is an actual state-appointed South African citizen who is representing the people of South Africa there. And he went on television, I believe, in front of the press, and he said, we will stand, the South African army, the South African military, will stand in support of Venezuela if the United States decides to take military action. And that just left me, I don't know, it left me kind of speechless. That someone would say such a completely ridiculous thing, that South Africa, this teeny tiny South African nation, was going to provide military support against the United States should it decide to do anything. But other than the ridiculousness of that is the fact that our government acts diplomatically and in foreign policy almost completely without a mandate in everything it does. So in Zimbabwe, I mean, there are millions of Zimbabweans living in South Africa. They are basically integrated into our society, and we actively support their oppressors. It wasn't put to the South African electorate once whether we should support the regime of Mugabe or the regime of Mangwakwa. It's just been decided by the ANC and by the governing party and the coalition. And it's the exact same thing in Venezuela. And it's a completely ideological thing. So this is one of the most important things that I think institutions in a real democratic society must achieve, is that the moment a party becomes part of government, there is a clear break between the party and the government. Right. And in South Africa's case, we have not achieved that. My favorite example is Taiwan and China. South Africa historically recognized Taiwan. As simple as that. You can talk about apartheid or whatever. Chinese people are not black or white. We recognize Taiwan. The moment the ANC got into power in 1994, that ended. It's done. We now recognize China. Taiwan is a province of China. That is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And that is the exact same thing we're doing with Venezuela and Zimbabwe. We are simply supporting these regimes because they share the governing party's ideology. no considerations of democratic mandate, no considerations of the constitutional values that we're supposed to be projecting to the world, saying we respect human rights and personal dignity and freedom, and therefore we have no choice but to support Morgan Tsvangirai and I forget the guy's name in Venezuela, but the National Assembly. None of that. It's just they support our ideology, we're going to support them. It's ridiculous. We really need to reconsider that whole thing that government can just decide its own foreign policy without speaking to the electorate. I think that's definitely something that needs to change.
I think it's an important point you raise, and it's easy for government to talk about human rights and things like that before elections. For example, they'll tell us about South Africans' dignity not being protected, and this party can give you your dignity if only you vote for them.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to foreign countries, they just follow the sort of, I don't know if they still believe in a world Marxist revolution or something like that, and they just want to see this come to fruition. But it's interesting that you raised that they they maybe talk the talk, but definitely don't walk the walk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to our next topic, President Cyril Ramaphosa attended the World Economic Forum in Davos this past week, as a lot of world leaders did, except the US. Donald Trump decided he wasn't going to travel himself.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he didn't go. But just talking about Cyril, this is part of his drive to raise 1 trillion rand in foreign investment in the country. That's been going since last year. He talked specifically about Eskom, and he tried to, I guess, get investors okay on the whole Eskom situation. Just to give you some numbers, Eskom is currently 471 billion rand in debt, which now means the debt it's permanent, it's fixed. So there's no way for them to get rid of it. Well, not any way that they can see anyway.
I think that number. Sorry, I just want to make a point. I think that number is 25% of the amount of tax that SARS collects every year. That's an insane number.
Yeah.
That's insane.
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. But the government is pretty much the line that it's holding to is that it won't let it go under. So it's going to try every way to save it now. There are new executives. There's a new board that's coming into power in Eskom. So apparently they're trying to get investors at Davos, to invest in the country, and because we know if Eskom folds, it's gonna be a run on all the SOEs, and the debt of the country is just gonna balloon. Not that it's a lot already. So Mpiyakhe, do you think the new board is going to bring about the necessary changes? They don't seem to. We've heard talk about privatization of SAA, but I don't think we're ever going to hear that with Eskom. So I don't know. What do you see is going to happen? Is it just going to fold, or what? What do you think?
When it comes to Eskom specifically, if anyone was going to have any positive impact on Eskom, it was going to be the new board. But the problem is the minister responsible for public enterprises, which is Pravin Gordhan, keeps overruling them. I remember last year when they said there would be 0 increases for Eskom staff, the minister overruled them. So I don't, if politics keeps interfering in the operations of Eskom, it's going to get worse and worse until the entire country goes bankrupt, and then we have to face inflation, which might become hyperinflation. We don't know. So we are facing a stark reality here, and politicians don't want to recognize it for what it is, because the potential losses for them are not as great as the potential losses for us. Right. I assume that most of them, they have I know Paul Pravin Gordhan is pretty much well diversified in terms of investments. He has investments in South Africa and abroad. Like you can look at the parliamentary members' declarations. He has investments in a whole lot of companies. I think they go into the millions or something.
Does Pravin Gordhan have investments in Venezuela and Zimbabwe?
I don't think so. No.
I wonder why. I wonder why.
No, it's that so socialism is a perfect system, but it's not for putting your money in. You see, you have to put other people's money in. That's how it works. So, I don't know. I don't see how Eskom can be fixed unless you just you remove its monopoly, keep it alive while private providers come into stream, and then just let it fall after that. That's the best you can do, because we'll never be able to pay off these debts, realistically speaking. And the only way we will be able to do it, because there's a limit to how much you can raise electricity prices, which are a tax in South Africa, because there's no competitor. So they are basically a tax. So there's a limit to how much you can raise electricity prices. There's a limit to how much you can tax South Africans. And so once those limits are reached, it's not clear what else you can do. So and I don't think we can raise up to the point where we can pay off that kind of debt. We just don't have the money.
Yeah, when you mentioned there politics trumping reality, I think it's even a matter of ideology trumping politics, because there's just this drive that we need Eskom, and because government is at the center, who else is going to provide electricity if not government? Martin, do you think that's the right way of looking at it, or do you think that's, do you think there's something else going on? I don't know.
Well, I think it's part of a broader point of government just continuously missing the point. So, I mean, this whole thing of our delegation, President Ramaphosa and whoever else with their little South African scarves around their heads, going
hashtag brand is A.
Yes, going to Davos to get people to invest. I mean, they're missing the point. So companies and enterprises do their own market research. They don't need you to come and tell them, please invest here. We need your investment. It's going to be safe. They know whether it's safe or not. You don't need to explain it to them. And I think the moment you need to go there and say, no, don't worry, actually Eskom is okay, and actually Eskom is gonna do okay, and actually our regime on property rights is actually very good.
Well, there we go.
Our crime is actually not as bad, and actually this, and actually that. Everything you've been told and everything you found out is false, and I'm here to tell you, don't worry, please invest, because it's actually great. Stop it. What you need to do is you need to take Eskom. You need to cut off the unity between the grid and power generation. Eskom can keep the grid, I guess, but we need to open the market for new power generation, and it needs to be unbundled. Maybe give Eskom one power station to provide electricity to the poor, but give or sell the rest to companies on a competitive bidding basis. Eskom needs to be privatized. It's as simple as that. Same with SAA, same with 99% of our SOEs. Expropriation without compensation.
Come on, Martin, you're supposed to be principled.
I don't know about the now on arms score, maybe, I don't know. But expropriation without compensation needs to be buried, gone. Like, those words should be said in that line again ever in South Africa. Various other policies, especially labor policies, need to be heavily relaxed, if not completely eliminated. And then you can stop asking for investment. Investment will come en masse. So it's just a case of government completely missing the point. They have the solution right there. They don't have to do... In fact, they need to just stop doing things. They don't have to do anything. Just stop doing things, and then investment will come. They're missing that point. This Davos thing is a waste of time. We've been there every year. I mean, for how long now? Our economic growth is virtually zero. It's going to continue to go down until we start contracting and whatever. So media journalists, why do you keep taking this seriously? Come on, guys. Just stop. There are more important stories. Forget about Davos. Come on.
Yeah. Basically, Davos is just a way for these politicians and business people to have a nice holiday at someone else's expense. And look at the countries which go to Davos. You have South Africa, you have Zimbabwe, and then the countries that actually attracts FDI on the African continent, Botswana, Rwanda, they may go, but they don't make such a big deal out of it because they have the fundamentals to attract investment on their own right without having to beg for it. So this. I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right, Martin.
It might be a good rule of thumb in future. The louder someone shouts at Davos, the less investors should listen to them, because why are they trying to make this big show of things like this laser show? When in reality, if it's a good investment, then like you said, the market will find it.
People will know if it's a good or a bad investment. This thing about going and selling the country is so ridiculous to me. It's like Shell or whoever, I know we already have Shell here, but if they want to go to South Africa, they would have done decades worth of research. They would have had people here looking at the circumstances in the country. and I'm sure other companies do this, and I think almost universally nowadays, these people go back to their head office in the US or in Europe and say, no way. There is no way that this is a good investment. Don't worry what the government tells you, just stay out. And that is why Ramaphosa and whoever keeps coming back to South Africa and saying, we got investment from the British government and from the Russian government and from the Chinese government. It's like, congratulations, guys.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you've gotten us a useless investment. And I don't even think that's how it works. It's not like just that's the money we get.
No.
It's some conditional thing that we see very little of. But the real investment we need are private enterprises that can create jobs, that will bring economic growth into the country. That's never to be seen, and it won't be seen if government continues down this trajectory.
This government believes in investment strikes, so you can see why they would go try and market the country for investment.
Oh my gosh.
All right, and then moving on to our last topic, which flows from our discussion on Eskom and investment, just corruption. And this past 2 weeks mostly, we've heard more revelations from the Zondo Commission and the large amounts of money which the country has lost, if you can think about the country losing money, due to corruption. This is sort of the point I've tried to make, especially on Donald Trump and people who have been very opposed to him and worried about when he was elected president. If you're so worried about your opposition coming into power, maybe you should focus on the amount of power that they have and lessening the size of government, because whoever comes into power, like with expropriation, we don't know who's going to be in power in 10 years. Now they might use it for a certain purpose, but in 10 years they might sort of put their target on someone else, another group of people they don't approve of, kind of thing. But I think just on the corruption thing, do you agree, Martin, that we keep wailing about corruption, but it doesn't seem like we're addressing the root cause of anything, and this is just gonna, we said the Guptas was the biggest corruption scandal. Now this Agreezy thing is the biggest thing. So what's, do you think in 5 years we're gonna have another huge scandal?
Yeah, look, South Africans, for some reason, I don't know why, because our history, if you look at our history from a purely objective standpoint, you would imagine that South Africans would come out of that and say, okay, we need institutions. We need strong institutions. We need strong ideas. But for some reason, South Africans today are still obsessed with personalities. We do not care about institutions. We don't care about ideas. We look at a person and we're like, wow, he looks like a pretty nice guy. I don't think he's going to be corrupt, because look how eloquent he talks. He goes to church every Sunday and he has a nice family. Look at his beautiful children. It's great. He's going to be the best leader. Expropriation, who cares? Come on, it's this guy. He's going to be fine. And then another guy who's not so eloquent, who is radical. No, he's corrupt. No, we need to make sure that person stays out of power. That specific person. Never do they say, oh, geez, these guys have pretty radical ideas. It would be bad if our system of government allowed something like this to actually rule over us. That's never said. They never say, oh, this idea, this ideology, this communism, this fascism, this is the problem. It doesn't matter whether that guy or that guy believes in it. It needs to be rooted out. So I don't know why the personality of people is still the issue. I mean, this Bosasa commission, they keep saying, I mean, okay, it's understandable. They investigate into specific corruption matters and they say, okay, this happened and here you gave money to this person and that's bad, you need to be prosecuted. At no point do they say, so what allowed you really to do this? What created the environment that allowed you to do this? And if they ask that question, then any attentive lawyer will go and say, oh, okay, it's section 13(1)(b) of this act, which says that this person in this office may approve tender requests based on no real constraining criteria, just if he thinks it's rational or whatever. Then he can make that decision, and then they'll say, okay, so there's the problem. We need to change this law, and that will create an institution that will respect the rule of law, whereby you need to be more transparent. You cannot just deny an application for a permit. You can't just approve any old request for a tender. Real institutions. And of course, at the heart of all this is our Constitution, which I'm a fan of the Constitution, but it has very serious flaws, procedural flaws, technical flaws, which essentially centralizes in the office of the president massive amounts of power to basically rule the executive branch of government, which is where the corruption is, tenders, contracts, and so forth, to basically just rule it. No real oversight, and the only oversight is very formalistic, nothing real of substance. So we need to talk about these things: the constitution, the constitutional safeguards, the ideas that South Africans have, the wording of provisions in legislation, and so forth. Real institutions, and not just forget about people's personalities. I mean, the thing with President Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, that whole story, the country was going crazy about comparing this person with this person and who's better and who's better. It's like, geez, if this other person is really as bad as you say they are, how in the hell does our system allow them to even get close to the presidency? And if it does, then there's a problem. Yeah.
And just to add on to Martin's point, there is that if I look at the USA, I mean, Donald Trump has some pretty crazy ideas, but no matter how crazy his ideas are, he has very little power to cause damage within the American system. The worst that can happen in the USA is that you get deadlock. That's people just don't agree, and then nothing gets done.
Which to me is a blessing.
Which is a great thing. I wish we had that, because it shows you that it's a system that's that is saying that has sanity built into it. That says, okay, if these people don't at the federal level, if these people at the federal level don't agree or don't all agree, and the power is divided in such a way that is spread out among many different kinds of people. In South Africa, basically, the national government is controlled by the ANC in its entirety. Like there's no separation among different, no, there's nothing like that. And then on top of that, in the USA, they also have something called vertical separation of powers, which means that the states also have powers in their own rights that cannot be taken away from them by the federal government. Which is something that we just don't have in South Africa. The national government can take away any power from the provinces that it wishes to choose, except those very few powers that define in the constitution, and so if we are not willing to change, if we are not willing to split power among more and more people within South Africa's government, within South Africa's states, then we will continue having these problems. If we are not willing to have institutions that are antagonistic to each other, then we will continue having problems, and we will still be complaining about corruption 50 years from now, saying, oh, but we thought that we could appoint this guy now. Maybe, oh, Musi, we had our hopes on Musi, that he would be the guy to just be the guy to end corruption, but he disappointed us. Who to appoint? Africa and their leaders. It's not African leaders. We are human like everyone else. It's African institutions. We just need the right ideas now.
Hey listeners, I think that's a good note to end on. It's a battle of ideas, not just a battle of personalities. We're not talking about sports teams here. This is real serious stuff, ideologies and battles. Martin, will you just remind the listeners where they can find our content, where they can follow us and subscribe to us?
Yeah, sure. And just before I get to that, from today is about a week left for you to donate to the FMF's 1 million Rand challenge. We need, I believe, about 180,000 Rand in donations before we are over the line and we've achieved our goal. So please go to the FMF's website, www.freemarketfoundation.com. You'll see a big banner that advertises the challenge. Click on that and you'll find all the information that you need there. Just to remind you, any donation that you provide will be matched by 50% by a generous donor. So if you give 1,000 Rand, then the donor will give 500 Rand additionally. And there's also some tax deduction stuff there that I don't know anything about, but which you can read about. So follow us on Twitter. It's at FMF South Africa. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/FMFSA, and please subscribe to this video, to this channel in the red button right below the video. Thanks. Cheers.